Good morning. My name is Reverend Dr. Ron Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to our Sunday service from the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast. Those of you that have been following along with our Sunday services will notice that my beautiful assistant isn't here today. She decided to take a Sunday off, so you're stuck with me. So I thought I'd begin with a couple of writings from Ernest Holmes from the book, This Thing Called You. And we'll take a few seconds when I'm concluded to meditate on them. So Ernest wrote, we should all say, I know I am one with God. I know that God in me is perfect. I know my real nature is spiritual. I know that I exist in a boundless good, in a heavenly state, and in perfect being. I know that my mind is being acted upon by pure spirit. Divine intelligence guides me into peace, happiness, and success, into joy, love, and perfect life. And he writes again, I expect everything I do to prosper. I enthusiastically expect success. I let good flow into my experience. I am seeing good in every direction I look. I am looking forward to more good. I am entering into a deeper understanding of life. I am recognizing my union with all people and all events. So how about if we just take a few minutes or in this silence to let those words sink in? So this morning, I'm going to be speaking on gratitude as a spiritual practice. And I want to begin with a quote from Meister Eckhart. And by the way, just as a piece of trivia, I looked up today and Meister Eckhart was born in the year 1260, which is actually 2 years after one of my favorite congregants, Carol Gabica, was born. So just a little piece of trivia. I'm sure I'll hear from Carol later today. However, Meister Eckhart wrote, if the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, that would be enough. So I want to tell you a story to kind of put the talk in a context. So Mike Robbins wrote a book titled Nothing Changes Until You Do. And in the book, he tells a story of a time he was taking a cab to the airport. And he noticed that the cab driver obviously wasn't from the U.S., so he asked him where he was from. And the cab driver said, Ethiopia. And he said to Mike, I've been here 20 years, and I'm a citizen, my 2 sons are citizens, and my wife is a citizen. He was so proud of being a citizen of the U.S. So along the way, Mike said to him, so tell me, what's your perspective on American culture? And they were getting near where Mike needed to leave, so the cab driver pulled over. He stopped the cab and he said to Mike, may I be honest with you? And Mike said, sure. And the cab driver said, I think most people in this culture act like spoiled brats. And Mike said, why do you say that? And he said, I was born in Ethiopia. Every day here is a good day. I thought it's a beautiful reminder that we have so much to be thankful, to be grateful for. And sometimes it slips by us in the busyness of every day. You know, being grateful is a way of life. Gratitude isn't a reactive emotion, it's a causative energy. And in the Bible, when Jesus blessed the fishes and the loaves, when he multiplied the fishes and the loaves, he began his prayer by saying thank you. Now, he wasn't giving thanks to God for so little food. He was giving thanks to God from a consciousness of gratitude, because Jesus knew there was always enough. And he chose to look beyond appearances and to get into the spiritual flow. So let me tell you a story that's closer to home for me. When I was in the school of ministry, I was really good friends, I still am, with one of the students who also is now a minister. And she got a call, I believe it was in the middle of the night, that her husband, who was a long-haul truck driver, had a heart attack and died unexpectedly. Needless to say, she was shattered. And months later, after the worst had passed and she was back in school, I said to her, what was the biggest thing that helped you get through that really difficult time? And she said to me, Ron, I was really hurting. And I made the decision that I was going to start a gratitude journal, that every night for 1 week, I would write down 5 things I was grateful for before I went to bed. And she said, I realized at the end of the week, as painful as that time was, I still had 35 things to be grateful for. And that got me through. Norm Bouchard is a CSL minister living in Colorado. And a few years ago, he wrote a book titled 29 Questions for the Ordinary Life. And one of the questions he asked in the book was, how can I show gratitude in my life? And he wrote that his mother wrote thank you cards all the time. And she inculcated that in him. And he talks about a time he had a birthday party and somebody gave him a beautiful gift. And he started to open it, and his mother said, no. Before you open it, you write a thank you note. And Norm said he still does, to this day, write thank you notes because his mom taught him, always be grateful for what you have. So think about some of the ordinary things in our life that we can be thankful for. You know, what about when you're trying to get into a crowded line of traffic and somebody stops and slows down and lets you in the flow? A few years ago, when Becky and I were in Arizona, we were online in a supermarket, and I got my wallet out and I couldn't find my credit card. And it was so embarrassing. I turned to Becky and I said, I can't pay for this. I can't find my credit card. And Becky hadn't brought her purse. And the person in front of us heard us and said, don't worry about it. I got it. And they paid for our groceries. Wasn't a lot, but it still was wonderful. When Becky and I lived in San Clemente, one of my sons was getting in trouble with the police. And the canine officer took a real interest in him. So I decided to call the captain up and talk to him about it. And when I first began the conversation, the captain was really cold as ice. And then as we got into it, he said, wait a minute. You mean this is an attaboy? And I said, yes, this is an attaboy. And our entire conversation shifted. And in fact, he invited me to come in to meet with them. And he wrote this officer up in the San Clemente Sheriff's newsletter. And our whole conversation changed when I told him how grateful I was for this deputy to take an interest in my young son. You know, something else personally that I'm grateful for is my wife Becky loving me just how I am. she has this unconditional love, and every day I feel really, really grateful for that. You know, the late great Unity minister Eric Butterworth wrote once, "The most important asset we have is the conscious control of our lives." You and I, by what we think and what we believe, can control our life. And Butterworth gives a really interesting example of a man who goes to the doctor and is told he has an incurable disease and 6 months to live. He goes to work the next day, and he's told several of his coworkers, and one of them says, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he said to him, "I'll do what I have always done, live with a grateful heart, one day at a time." And Butterfield writes, that was 10 years ago, and he's still going strong. And maybe that's because of the healing influence of a grateful heart. Giving thanks keeps us in the divine flow. I know a lot of you out there are Wayne Dyer fans. And Wayne Dyer writes about gratitude in several of his books. And what he says is that gratitude is an inner process. It's an attitude of thankfulness. It's experiencing the world with love rather than judgment. And he writes in the book about 3 obstacles to feeling and experiencing gratitude. So let's talk about them for a minute. The first one, he says, is fault finding. And I love this. He says, you and I have a choice. We can be love finding or we can be fault finding. And he says fault finding focuses on what's wrong in our life, what's missing. And it shows up in our life with judgment, with criticism, and with anger. And he says, remember, as we think, so shall it be. So as we concentrate on finding fault, more and more lack shows up in our life. The second obstacle he talks about is complaining. And he says when we complain, we'll always feel shortchanged, deprived, and isolated. And again, what does that lead to? It leads to us feeling angry. And we feel shortchanged. And he said to manage the desires that we have in life, we need to move into life with unconditional love. And the third obstacle that he talks about is taking what you have for granted. When we're unaware of the gifts that we have in life, we're drained of some of the joy that we might be feeling. Feeling gratitude is a choice. When we live with gratitude, when we live with appreciation, we'll cultivate more appreciation and more gratitude. Another Wayne Muller, gives a beautiful example of what Wayne Dyer was talking about. A friend of Wayne Muller's was in the last stages of AIDS. He was dying, and he was very weak, but he wanted to get out and walk outside. And his nurse told him, "You're too weak, you can't do that." But he was a stubborn guy, and he just said, "Yes, I can." And he got out of bed, he stumbles out of bed, somehow gets outside, takes a few steps, and falls down. And the nurse goes running over to him and says, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And he turns on his back, looks up, gives her a big smile, and says, "The sun feels so good on my face." In less than a week, he'll be dead. But in this moment, he's thankful. Gratitude is a choice. So I read a blog this week by a minister named Carl Gregg, and he writes about ways we can experience gratitude. And I want to share two of them with you. One of them is noticing, just noticing. And he asks, what do you notice today? What did you notice today? And what do you tend to notice in life? And why do you notice it? And he said, one way that we can cultivate gratitude is to notice the world around us and see what we're grateful for, and then share it with a friend. Can you imagine the beautiful conversations that we could have with one another if we're willing to take some time and go to a friend and say, you know, I was on a walk today and I saw whatever it is, and I'm so grateful it's in my life. You know, when Becky and I lived in Arizona, we had a beautiful dog. He was an Akita, and his name was Sumo. And one morning, it was a Saturday morning, and I was taking Sumo on a walk. And my mind was 1,000 miles away, because usually on Saturday mornings, I put my messages together. And so we're walking, and I'm thinking, oh, I've got this talk to do, and I've got this to do and that to do. And I looked at Sumo, and his head was up, and he was smelling and looking around. And I realized Sumo was enjoying that moment. He was loving it and feeling such gratitude for being outside and smelling this and smelling that. And I wasn't with him. I was 1,000 miles away in my head. And it really brought me down to thinking, here's my dog, and he's expressing more gratitude this morning than I am. And this minister refers to Mary Oliver as the patron saint of noticing. And he quotes from one of her poems titled, Poem of the One World. And I'd like to share it with you. This morning, the beautiful white heron was floating along above the water and into the sky of this one world we all belong to, where everything, sooner or later, is part of everything else, which made me feel for a while quite beautiful myself. How wonderful she noticed. The second thing I want to share with you is a concept he referred to as savoring. I don't know about you, but just the word savoring feels really good coming off my tongue. And what he suggests is every night before we go to sleep, that we lie in bed and name those things that we're grateful for that day. Isn't that a really beautiful way to fall asleep, savoring the things we cherish? So here we are. We're in a time of confusion. We're in a time, for some people, of fear. And we're in a time, really for all of us, to feel uncertain. So given all of that, what do we have to be grateful for? Let's talk about that. How about being grateful for the people in our lives that love us? How about being grateful for all of the heroes we see on TV every time we turn on the news? All of the doctors and nurses that are risking their lives to heal us, to make us comfortable. And even when somebody is near death and their family can't be with them, to hold their hands and love them at the last minute they're leaving this life. How about all of the first responders, all of the people that are working in our groceries, filling the shelves, the cashiers, the clerks, all of the people in our pharmacies that are keeping them open, our restaurateurs that are doing the best they can to keep their establishments open and serving us. How about the people in our life that call us to see how we're doing? And how about the blessings we have? I'm sure everybody listening to me this morning has adequate shelter. You know, I saw something on the news the other day that in Texas, 10,000 people went to a food bank because they didn't have enough food. One of them said to a news reporter, "I'm a waitress and I don't have enough food." Friday, Becky and I had Publix deliver our groceries to us. And after I helped her unpack, I heard her mumbling a little bit, and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Ron, we have so much food, I don't know where to put it all." Isn't that a blessing? And yes, by the way, most of us have enough toilet paper now too, don't we? So what I would encourage you to do is take some time today. Think about the blessings that are in your life and maybe add to the list that I just gave you. So before I do the closing prayer, I want to read something to you that Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote. He said, "Write it on your heart that every day is the best day in the year. He is so rich who owns the day, and no one owns the day who allows it to be invaded with fret and anxiety. Finish every day and be done with it. You have done what you could. Some blunders and absurdity have no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. Begin it well and serenely, with too high a spirit to be cumbered with your old nonsense. This new day is too near, with its hopes and invitations to waste a moment on the yesterdays." So join with me for a moment and just know that there is one divine life that is expressing in and through each and every one of us, every moment of our life. And I am knowing that this divine presence that I experience is all that I am. I am not all of God, but God is all of me. So I speak this word for the world. I know that as a human experience, this coronavirus can be very scary and frightening. But I also know it is just a human experience, and that our highest truth is each of us is whole, perfect, and complete, just as we are. And as we come into that realization, as we remember our oneness, our closeness with this divine presence, the fear and the anxiety fades, and what remains is love, peace, and serenity. And so I want to take this moment to bless all of the first responders that do so much to help us every day. All of the medical people who risk their lives so we can live and be healed. I bless them and know that each of them is divinely guided and directed to make perfect, life-affirming choices. I bless all of those who have made their transition from COVID-19, and I know that they are in a better place. There's no more pain, there's no more anxiety. They rest in the arms of Spirit. I bless all of those who right now are experiencing this virus, and I know for them that the healing presence of Spirit embraces them, touches their lives, brings healing and wholeness to them and through them. And lastly, I bless all of those who have lost loved ones or who have loved ones who are sick right now. I know for them that this divine presence is touching their lives, bringing love, compassion, peace, and serenity to them and through them. And so for all of this and so much more, I just say thank you, life, thank you, God, and I release this word and let it be. And so it is. Thank you for being here this morning. God bless you, and have a wonder-filled life and week.